Brutus wasn't the only killer, but who held the other 23 blades? March 15th, 44 BCE. The Ides of March. Julius Caesar lies bleeding on the Senate floor, his toga soaked crimson with blood from 23 separate wounds. History remembers Brutus, the noble son who betrayed his father figure. But here's what they don't teach you in school. Brutus wasn't alone. He wasn't even the leader. 23 other men stood in that chamber, each clutching a blade, each sworn to end the life of the most powerful man in the ancient world. Their names have been lost to time, overshadowed by Shakespeare's tragic hero. But these weren't bit players in history's greatest political assassination. They were senators, generals, and Rome's elite, each with their own burning reasons to want Caesar dead. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on history's most famous murder. Who were these forgotten killers? What drove them to conspiracy? And why has history buried their stories beneath the legend of Brutus? Welcome to Chapters in History. I'm your host, and today we're uncovering the truth behind the 23 blades that ended the Roman Republic. Chapter 1. The conspiracy takes shape. The conspiracy didn't begin with Brutus. It began with a man whose name you've probably never heard, Gaius Cassius Longinus. While Brutus gets the dramatic spotlight, Cassius was the true architect of Caesar's downfall. Picture this. It's 45 BCE, 1 year before the assassination. Caesar has just returned from his final military campaign, more powerful than any Roman before him. He's been declared dictator for life, and whispers suggest he wants to be king, a title that would destroy the very foundations of the Roman Republic. Cassius wasn't motivated by noble ideals about freedom and democracy. This was personal. Years earlier, Caesar had humiliated him, passing him over for important positions and publicly questioning his competence. Cassius burned with resentment, and he began quietly reaching out to like-minded senators. The conspiracy grew slowly, carefully. Cassius knew he needed legitimacy, a name that would give their cause moral weight. That's where Marcus Junius Brutus came in. Brutus was Caesar's protege, almost like a son to him. More importantly, he was descended from the Brutus who had founded the Roman Republic by overthrowing the last king. But recruiting Brutus wasn't easy. Caesar had showered him with honors, wealth, and affection. It took months of careful manipulation before Cassius convinced Brutus that killing Caesar was his patriotic duty, that he was betraying his ancestors' legacy by allowing Caesar to become a tyrant. Chapter 2. The Forgotten Conspirators. Once Brutus joined, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, senators who had been quietly grumbling about Caesar's power began declaring their willingness to act. But who were these men willing to commit the ultimate crime? Let's start with Decimus Junius Brutus, Albinus, not to be confused with Marcus Brutus. Decimus was actually closer to Caesar than his more famous namesake. Caesar had named him in his will as a backup heir. Yet Decimus harbored deep resentment about being overshadowed by Caesar's adopted son, Octavian. On the morning of the Ides of March, it was Decimus who convinced Caesar to attend the Senate meeting, personally escorting him to his death. Then there was Gaius Trebonius, Caesar's former lieutenant who had served with distinction in Gaul. Trebonius had been promised great rewards for his service, but Caesar had broken those promises when it suited him. Trebonius volunteered for a crucial role. He would detain Mark Antony outside the Senate chamber, ensuring Caesar's most loyal ally couldn't interfere. Julius Servilius Casca struck the first blow. A relatively minor senator, Casca later claimed he acted purely from Republican principles. But historical records suggest he was deeply in debt and had been counting on Caesar's promised land distributions that never came. Perhaps most shocking was the participation of senators who had built their entire careers on Caesar's favor. Men like Lucius Tillius Cimber, who Caesar had personally appointed to govern provinces. Cimber approached Caesar during the Senate meeting under the pretense of requesting his brother's recall from exile, the signal that began the attack. These weren't random thugs or hired killers. These were Rome's elite, men who dined at Caesar's table and accepted his gifts, yet plotted his murder in the shadows. Chapter 3. The Personal Vendettas. What's fascinating is how personal this conspiracy was.
Each man had his own reason for wanting Caesar dead, and those reasons reveal the complex web of Roman politics and personal relationships.
Take Lucius Minucius Basileus, for instance. He had served Caesar faithfully for years, expecting to be rewarded with the governorship of a wealthy province. Instead, Caesar gave the position to a younger, less experienced man, probably because Basileus had made some critical comments about Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra. That slight festered until it became murderous rage. Or consider Quintus Ligarius, who had actually fought against Caesar during the Civil War. Caesar had pardoned him, an act of mercy that should have inspired loyalty. Instead, Ligarius saw it as humiliating condescension. He joined the conspiracy because he couldn't bear living under the mercy of a man he considered his inferior. The conspiracy even included men with family connections to Caesar. Publius Casca and his brother Gaius were from an old Roman family that had served the Republic for generations. They convinced themselves that killing Caesar was continuing their family's tradition of service, even though Caesar had personally advanced their careers. What emerges from studying these individual stories is a picture of a conspiracy born not from high-minded Republican ideals, but from a toxic mixture of personal grievances, wounded pride, and political opportunism. These men told themselves they were saving the Republic, but they were really settling scores. Chapter 4. The Fatal Morning. The morning of March 15, 44 BCE, dawned with omens that Romans would later claim predicted disaster. Caesar's wife Calpurnia had dreamed of his death and begged him not to go to the Senate. Soothsayers warned him to beware the Ides of March. Even Caesar himself seemed unusually hesitant. This is where Decimus Brutus played his crucial role. While others might have failed to persuade Caesar, Decimus had a unique relationship with him. He mocked Caesar's superstitions, calling him weak for listening to his wife's nightmares. "What will the senators think?" Decimus asked. "If the great Caesar fails to appear because of a woman's dream." It worked. Caesar agreed to go, and Decimus personally accompanied him to the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting that day. The irony wasn't lost on the conspirators. They were planning to kill Caesar in a building erected by Pompey, Caesar's former rival. As they walked, Caesar encountered the soothsayer who had warned him about the Ides of March. "The Ides of March have come," Caesar called out mockingly. Left, single quotation mark. "Aye, they have come," the soothsayer replied, "but they have not yet passed." At the Senate House, everything proceeded according to plan. Trebonius engaged Mark Antony in conversation outside, just as arranged. The other conspirators took their predetermined positions around Caesar's chair. The session began normally, with routine business and speeches. Then Tullius Cimber approached Caesar with his petition about his brother's exile. As Caesar waved him away dismissively, Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down from his shoulders, the agreed-upon signal. Casca struck first, but his blow was clumsy, only wounding Caesar's neck. Caesar spun around, grabbing Casca's arm and shouting in Latin, "Casca, you villain! What are you doing?" What happened next was chaos. 23 men, including some of the most powerful figures in Rome, descended on Caesar with their daggers. In their frenzy, they wounded each other as much as their target. Ancient sources tell us that only one of the 23 wounds was actually fatal. The others were superficial, inflicted by men who wanted to participate but lacked the stomach for effective murder. Chapter 5. The Aftermath and Legacy. The conspirators expected to be hailed as liberators, but Rome's reaction was far different than they anticipated. The common people, who had loved Caesar for his generous public works and entertainment, were horrified. Rather than celebrating the return of Republican government, they mourned their fallen leader. Within hours, the conspirators realized their mistake. They had killed Caesar, but they had no plan for what came next. Mark Antony, rather than fleeing Rome as they expected, seized control of Caesar's papers and funds. More dangerously, Caesar's adopted heir Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, began gathering support for revenge. One by one, the 23 conspirators met violent ends. Cassius and Brutus, the conspiracy's leaders, committed suicide after their defeat at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. But the lesser-known conspirators often met worse fates. Decimus Brutus, the man who had convinced Caesar to attend the Senate that fatal morning, was hunted down and executed by a Gallic chieftain seeking favor with Mark Antony. Trebonius was captured and tortured to death. Antony personally supervised his execution, making it last for days. Tullius Cimber, who had given the signal for the attack, was proscribed, meaning anyone could kill him legally for a reward. He fled to Sicily but was eventually captured and beheaded. Lucius Minucius Basileus, ironically, was killed by his own slaves in a completely unrelated incident. Even they, it seemed, were tired of his brutal treatment. Within 3 years of Caesar's assassination, virtually every conspirator was dead. Their grand plan to restore the Roman Republic had instead destroyed it forever, paving the way for the imperial system that would dominate the Western world for the next 5 centuries.
Final chapter. Conclusion.
The story of Caesar's assassination is usually told as the tragedy of Brutus, the noble Roman torn between love and duty. But the real story is far more complex and, in many ways, more human. It's the story of 23 men who let personal grievances and political miscalculations drive them to commit history's most consequential murder. These weren't heroes or villains in the simple sense. They were complicated individuals, senators and generals, friends and enemies, men who had built their careers in Caesar's shadow, but couldn't bear to live in it forever. They convinced themselves they were saving Rome, but they were really destroying it. Their names may be forgotten, but their actions echo through history. The fall of the Roman Republic, the rise of the empire, the centuries of imperial rule that followed, all of it traces back to that bloody morning when 23 daggers ended one man's life and changed the course of civilization. The next time you hear about the Ides of March, remember, it wasn't just Brutus. It was 23 men, each with his own blade, each with his own reasons, each playing his part in one of history's greatest turning points. What other forgotten figures lurk behind history's most famous moments? Let me know in the comments what conspiracy or historical mystery you'd like us to explore next. And if you enjoyed diving deep into the real story behind Caesar's assassination, make sure to subscribe to Chapters in History for more untold stories from the past. Until next time, keep questioning what you think you know about history.